Hi there. This is a special bonus video I put together on what are the top 10 fan questions right now about House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones prequel series about the Dance of the Dragons. When I say top 10, I mean serious questions. Some of the things casual viewers ask are things that could not reasonably be answered by the showrunners or anyone, like, will it be good? Or how can this show succeed after how bad Game of Thrones was in its final seasons, particularly season 8? There really can't be a coherent answer to that. And it's not just season 8, it's as soon as they went off books in season 5, and there were problems since the beginning. But will it be good? That's so vague as to be meaningless. I mean, legitimate questions with coherent answers that they could plausibly give. And the point of this is these are real questions which we could plausibly submit to the showrunners and then the new writers in a moderated Q&A or something. The short answer I'll give for the question of, well, how are things going to be different from how bad Game of Thrones got is they actually have an entirely new writing staff this time. Indeed, they have a full writing staff of a dozen people at all, instead of just giving total control with zero oversight to two guys who, by their own admission, had no prior experience or training in television whatsoever. That this is one of the biggest cons in TV history. That's the Elizabeth Holmes of the TV industry, and the truth is slowly coming out about that. On top of it, it has new writers, it has writers, professional writers from a bunch of other things. I've been reporting on this. They have a full writing staff of professional writers this time. On top of that, HBO itself has gone through two big leadership changes since Game of Thrones ended. Not one, but two big changes. First, they were bought out by AT&T, then Discovery just recently. So Richard Plepler is gone, the guy that enabled Benioff and Weiss for a decade, and the people who replaced him are also gone. That it is very much as it ever could be, a complete restart, a blank slate. This is the new HBO. This is an entirely new writing staff. When people go, oh, how do we know they won't repeat the same mistakes? It's entirely different people. But that's a vague question and not something I would present to the showrunners. So I want to focus on plausible questions because part of this is me shaming the news media, the hype media that enabled Game of Thrones to decline like this. I saw this terrible article on Screen Rant that listed the top 10 fan questions, and it wasn't they asked their comments, it's one guy came up with what he thought were 10 questions. I don't know why he thought they were the top ones, just to fill a quota. And it was so bad. This was back in, he posted it in late February, so by March-ish, I posted this to the community tab on my YouTube channel. This is awful, and we were discussing, I posted it in my Twitter feed. It was pretty widespread discussion because it was that bad, and widespread mockery of, you put no effort into this. This isn't even, oh, well, I'm a TV-only fan. You clearly do not like your job and do not like reporting on this. You put no effort into it. I really like how one of my Twitter followers succinctly described it. Direct quote, it's alternately banal questions he could have Googled, bizarre questions, or just plain wondering if Game of Thrones celebrity actors will be recast in lead roles in the prequel. So, of course, this generated a lot of discussion. This is awful, so I started a new thread on my community tab asking everyone, what are your top 10 questions? And I started off, I actually had like 8 already, which, common sense, everyone said, yeah, those are pretty much our top 7 or 8 questions too. Particularly the first 2 or 3 are pretty much everyone shares. Though there were 4 other questions that they suggested that I hadn't thought to include at first. So we made a list of about 20 questions, which I have now condensed and combined into 10. Like, some of these they're really 2 parts of the same question, so rather than put them as question 10 and 11, I combined them into question 10. So 10 things, some of them are multi-part, but you'll see it makes sense. It's basically 10 broad questions, which, unlike this guy who was just throwing this out there, I felt really summarized what we're thinking right now. Actually, to give you more context to this, let me quickly read off the top 10 questions that Screen Rant came out with in February. This guy named David Mello, who I don't know how you have a job reporting on this. Did you just get hired because you're someone's friend? I don't know. 10, counting down to 1. Question 10. What happened to the Long Night prequel? That is a legitimate question, but it's not about House of the Dragon. And what, you couldn't think of 10 questions, so he had to pad it out? And actually, some of these questions are redundant with each other. He really couldn't think of 10 things to ask. I had to cut down a list of 20 questions to 10. Think about that. Question 9. Will it recapture the global zeitgeist the way Game of Thrones did? That's just asking, will it be popular, phrased differently. That's so vague as to be meaningless. That doesn't mean anything. Would you ask one of the showrunners that to their face? That's wasting a question. And skipping around a little for ones that are linked. Number 4, will it suffer from prequel-itis like Lord of the Rings Hobbit movies and Harry Potter Fantastic Beasts prequels? That's the same question, just phrased differently. And well, it's a prequel. The Hobbit movies had problems with production behind the scenes. I actually think Peter Jackson managed to pull out a decent movie, could have been better. But it wasn't his fault. The source material wasn't the fault there. It was other stuff. Fantastic Beasts was a cash grab, which I feel bad about because I like the cast. And you could tell they were trying, the writers weren't. But will a prequel be good? Will it be good? These are all the same vague question. There's nothing here worth repeating. Number 8. Will there be cameos from Game of Thrones cast members like Emilia Clarke? And you realize after reading through his whole thing, I'm not going to go into it, he didn't want like a cameo. He wanted, will they be cast in recurring roles in it? Like, I would like to see Emilia Clarke make like a 2-minute cameo in a Valyria prequel as like her 400 years ago ancestor, but not as a recurring role. That's pandering. Like as a walk-on thing, as a literally a cameo. This is the difference between a cameo and this is fan service and it's stupid. Let's recast them in major roles. On top of that, this guy clearly just wants to see Maisie Williams in an Arya costume again. Because question 5 was, what's west of Westeros? Because he wants to see Maisie Williams as Arya again. And it's people who want to see Maisie, it's not Arya. This ceased to be TV Arya a while ago. And even things like she just saying her catchphrases, being, quote, badass, as they say, and saying, Maisie dressed up like Arya, going to a convention and saying, not today, and reciting catchphrases like when Bart Simpson had his catchphrase episode in The Simpsons, just, this has ceased to be television. Arya doesn't even say not today in the books. And he goes, well, what's west of Westeros? You could Google whether this prequel novella shows things west of Westeros. It doesn't. And even if you want to see Arya again, it's set 200 years before she was alive. So why would you want to investigate places west of Westeros where you're not even going to see Arya? This makes no sense, you see. You can tell he's just going off of hype from Season 8 and still believes in that. Question 7 is, of course, offensive. It's well established that the Targaryens are mad, are insane. But why? Maybe this could explore Targaryen madness more. Dude, you seriously think Dany going insane was the real ending? And not just an ass pull by Benioff and Weiss? Realize it's a bigger discussion, but no, so many people, I realized, were being strung along by the promise that next season will retroactively explain why things don't make sense this season. I've seen this in other fandoms, Battlestar Galactica, Lost, Heroes. People would keep insisting we need another season to retroactively fix the last one. It never works. Like people who don't just want Game of Thrones Season 8 to be remade, even though it was already trash after Seasons 5 through 7, but who insist, bring them all back for Season 9, so we can retroactively fix Season 8. Like, I can kind of see the argument remake season 8, but, well, remake it to the books while you're at it, start from the beginning. But no, we can bring in a 9th season that will retroactively redeem season 8. That's insane. And of going, oh, the Targaryens are all insane. Jon Snow's father is Rhaegar Targaryen, and he's not insane. No, most Targaryens were not insane. A few prominent ones were. And we know why. It's from all the inbreeding, which made them... Martin has talked about this, that it's like a thoroughbred. It made them really brilliant. It maintained their ability to bond with dragons. It's just that, they're high-strung. Brilliance and madness are the same coin. It's not they were alternately brilliant or insane. It's they were these larger-than-life figures who were controversial and a little nutty, but that's how they rolled with that. But enough people keep asking that, and I'm not going to dignify it of, will this show... It's like asking for season 9. Will this show retroactively explain how Dany going insane made sense? It won't, because it can't, because that was just bad writing. It was an ass pull by Benioff and Weiss. For shock value, we think it's because they wanted to win Emmy Awards, and then thought, wait a minute, an Emmy-baiting scene of Jon killing Dany, people will be mad at us for killing Dany, so let's make Dany a villain so people won't be mad at us. And they've done that with other characters like Stannis or even the Sand Snakes. If a character is going to die and you think people are going to be angry at you, ruin them so people will praise you for killing them. It's just this time you can't do that in only 2 episodes. I don't think you ever could do that after building her up that much. But, will this retroactively explain Targaryen madness? Targaryen madness was not that pervasive. None of the Targaryens in this are insane in the Dance of the Dragons era, the way the Mad King was schizophrenic. That isn't going to happen. You can tell this is a guy who just watched season 8 and believed the hype. Are we going to see Emilia Clarke explain Targaryen madness? Are we going to see West of Westeros to see Arya? That's physically impossible. Number 6, you can tell this is a guy who didn't even bother, reading a wiki page about this book. Septon Barth. What? That he asks if Septon Barth will appear in it, who was the hand of the king to King Jaehaerys for many years, and he wrote a lot of books on dragon lore. You can tell this guy just read an excerpt of something and thought Barth is a prominent character in this. He died years before the Dance of the Dragons. Is sort of a question about, will King Jaehaerys cameo at the very beginning of Dance of the Dragons, because they mentioned the Great Council at Harrenhal. Barth died before that. It's just the fact that he goes to Septon Barth instead of Jaehaerys. It's just this guy read the back cover of a book and then wrote a news article about it. How does he have a job and not people who actually know how to report on this? I mean, there are dozens of people, like anyone I've seen around who've actually read this. They're popular books, and the guy you put in charge of writing this news article doesn't know basic stuff. Number 2, but he's counting down to the most important ones? I don't know. Question number 2, what color will the dragons be? He actually listed that. You can Google that. Caraxes was red. Syrax was yellow. Sunfire was golden. And how is that a question? And this one, number 1, was just plain wrong. Given that Fire and Blood was planned as 2 volumes, but only 1 volume is out, won't they run into the same problem as Game of Thrones did by not having the ending written yet? Okay, you're an idiot, and you should at the very least not be allowed to write Game of Thrones articles for Screen Rant anymore. You could have Googled this. The Fire and Blood duology, it's 2 books, the first one is out yet. Martin said the second one won't be done until the main books are done. They cover 300 years of Targaryen history. The first book covers the first 150 years. They cover multiple prequel eras. They're not one show in one book. Martin has said you could make 20 TV seasons out of the content I put in Volume 1 alone. And just, you did not Google this, that the entire story of the Dance of the Dragons is contained in Volume 1. It begins, it ends, and it goes into the Regency era, which is technically a sequel era, though it's a direct sequel. Some people consider it part of the overall Dance of the Dragon story. I don't. Volume 2 is covering the Blackfire rebellions and stuff, but either way, that's actually a selling point for House of the Dragon. We know how it ends. This civil war has a definitive end. It's in print. I mean, it's an outline, but he did not know that you could have read this about Fire and Blood, and you're reporting on this. And we wonder how Benioff and Weiss managed to thrive so much from season 5 onwards. This is utter lack of journalism, real journalism. This is just someone, what, you're an intern that got put in charge of the Game of Thrones content on a major news site? It's that easy? I don't know. So, you see, everyone who I showed this to back in March, we were so disgusted with it, and it actually generated considerable discussion, that we said we should make up a list of what our top 10 questions are that we could really submit. So I sat down, like I said, I made some, others were suggested. There were 16 to 20 questions. I condensed them into 10 and typed it up here. Just thinking about that, I don't blame people who haven't read the prequel books, or in A Song of Ice and Fire, I didn't mind when people watching Game of Thrones hadn't read the books. I blame casual viewers who just plain don't care that it's based on something and don't even try to ask. I've said this before, it's not book fans versus non-book fans, it's attentive fans versus what I call the people watching for tits and dragons, after what one of the actors said. That I saw attentive fans who hadn't read the books, who nonetheless were revolted by season 5 onwards, because they comprehended that it was based on a book and understood this makes no sense. Versus this guy here, like, you didn't even bother to Google which book covers which, and why are you mansplaining, essentially? You're acting as if you're speaking with authority. These are the top 10 fan questions. These aren't even your top 10 questions. You were filling a quota for writing that day. You didn't ask and didn't look up anything. It's 10 minutes could have drastically fixed this thing, and he just didn't put any effort into it. So I made these questions, and remember, the phrasing or intent of them aren't just a vague, will it be good, or things I really want to know, like plot mysteries, but specific questions we could plausibly ask the new showrunners in an interview and expect a specific response. Remember when Benioff and Weiss were asked a specific question at a con, there was a video of this, why did you invent that rape scene that wasn't in the books, derailing a character's story arc? And their reaction was not only to dodge the question, but they stopped giving interviews for a full year after that. Between 2014, 2016-ish, and even then, the last 3 years, they were only doing glorified press releases, not open fan appearances, because those questions are screened. That I'm not even going to explain why I invented a rape subplot that derailed a character. We don't deserve this shabby treatment. We have legitimate Q&A we'd like to submit. Conversely, that means we need to police ourselves because no one else will. The falling standards on our end, if we need to crack some heads if this is what journalism has devolved into, and restructure it. So we need to weed out the vague questions. They'll never answer a plot mystery in a live Q&A, by which I mean, how many times have you seen in videos of people asking cast and crew, or Martin himself, who is Jon Snow's mother? Like during Comic-Con, during Q&A panels, and you seriously think he's going to answer that at a live Q&A? That's a major plot mystery. And not even, I can almost see how someone could phrase it as, do you know, has Martin told you who Jon Snow's mother is? Well, I think Kit would say at first he didn't tell me because my character doesn't know. But you really think they're just, the specific con, where the contrast at, it was the Oxford Union panel right before 2015 season 5. Oxford Union panel, a girl got up and asked, not the Sansa stuff, that hadn't happened yet, but that scene that Jaime Cersei sex scene that was filmed so badly it looked like rape, and the actors later and director later said it wasn't, it's just filmed badly, giving that impression. And they were so insensitive to criticism that they wouldn't admit their failure, that right after a girl stood up, bravely asked them, what were you doing with that scene? Was that rape or not? What was your intent? What are your thoughts for Jaime's character arc? Benioff just floundered around for 2 minutes, giving vague non-answers like, well, the cast works hard and Jaime did that because it's a thing he would do. He literally said that. The very next question, as if nothing had happened, the next kid, this guy who was online asked, hey, Kit, who's Jon Snow's mother? And between the one half of us are worried about why are you making drastic changes to this, and the other one was asking a hype question about a plot mystery that they could not realistically answer. He used up a question because there's a finite number of people online that someone else could have. And then remember the last Comic-Con when they had that totally scripted Season 8 panel led by James Hibbard, and then after saying they would have Q&A, went, oh, we ran out of time, and didn't have fan Q&A, and a lot of people were going to ask about, Daenerys and stuff. That, why didn't you just say there'd be no Q&A instead of doing this whole song and dance of pretending, oh no, we didn't skip Q&A, we ran overtime by accident. You know this, so this is, at least on our end, we need to be able to present a succinct, good list of these are what we would ask, because it's just a free-for-all where there's so much incompetence out there. So, with that in mind, I condensed everything down after what I came up with, what everyone else came up with, these 10 questions. Some of them are multi-part, but I think generally matches what we're looking for at this point in time before we even have a trailer for House of the Dragon Season 1. And they're loosely in decreasing order of importance. Top of the list, number 1 is the most important question. Number 2, slightly after that. I tried to start with the most popular, most important questions first instead of leaving you in suspense. So these are weighted by importance. Question 1. How will House of the Dragon handle the unreliable narrator when the historical texts give different accounts? This is pretty much everyone's top question, for the top legitimate question. In the main novels, Martin liked playing around with the concept of objective truth by having different chapters narrated by different characters' own third-person POVs. So you'd have a Ned Stark POV chapter, and then later on you'd have a Jaime Lannister POV chapter. You could have a Daenerys POV chapter alternating with a Tyrion POV chapter. And they have drastically different interpretations about in-universe events, sometimes based on limited information. Like, when Tyrion goes to Meereen in the 5th book, he can tell that some of the mercenaries working for Daenerys, like Brown Ben Plum, are a lot less honest than she thought they were. And just, it's weird, after spending so many books with only Daenerys being the viewpoint character for all the people around her, like Jorah, when you get another POV character, could have been Tyrion, could have been anyone else, when you see someone else's perspective on this, or Barristan Selmy for that matter, when we started getting other POVs of the events around Daenerys, and their slightly different interpretations, or, a case in point, biggest example is like how Ned Stark in his POV in the 1st book thinks Jaime is this self-serving coward, when secretly Jaime actually killed the Mad King for entirely selfless reasons. He was actually heroic because the Mad King was going to blow up the city. But Ned doesn't know that. And just playing around with it, there's alternate POVs like that and misinformation. And Martin said, he does this because this is what Faulkner did in his literature, and it's interesting. The Fire and Blood prequel anthology book, which this is based on, isn't written as narration, it's an outline, so it's written as an in-universe history book, without character POVs. So the way Martin retained that sense of unreliable narrator was that the historian writing the book has what he, the historian, acknowledges are divergent, biased sources. That there's a pro-Rhaenyra history of the Dance of the Dragons, which was written by the people who survived it, and there's a pro-Aegon II history of the Dance of the Dragons written by the survivors of his faction, which is anti-Rhaenyra. And this new historian who's writing like a full century after all these people died He's weighing his sources like a real-life historian has to weigh his sources, keeping in mind they're biased from both sides of a war. So he'll say, this is what the pro-Rhaenyra source said, and this is what the anti-Rhaenyra source said. We kind of have to weigh which one seems most realistic. Sometimes he's wrong, though. You can tell, like, just because it's not realistic doesn't mean it didn't happen. Sometimes he'll say, this is probably what happened. Other times, even the in-universe historian will say, I'm not really sure which version really happened because it was a conversation behind closed doors and no one ever reported on it directly. We don't have a recording of it. Case in point, big example because it'll be happening in season 1 of House of the Dragon. The pro-Rhaenyra source says that she broke up with Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, while the anti-Rhaenyra pro-Aegon II source says that Criston Cole broke up with her. Which way was it? Did she break up with him or he broke up with her? We have no objective knowledge of what really happened. So how will a TV show portray that? Will they choose one version or the other? Or will they leave it deliberately ambiguous by having other characters describe what happened off screen? You know, like have a scene of one of Rhaenyra's followers saying, I heard that she rejected Criston. Then have one of Aegon II's followers interject and go, no, I heard Criston rejected her, but not actually show that on camera. You know, just have people describing something they heard about. Or will they outright go with a Rashomon approach by, I don't know, filming alternate versions of flashback scenes and then alternating, you know, intercutting them, like show a montage of, I say this is what happened, and the camera cuts to a flashback of everyone acting one way, and then someone else, no, I heard it happen this way, and then visually show the other version, and you're not really sure which is the real one. That can be a little complicated. I'd rather they just describe it verbally, that I heard this, well, I heard the other version on camera, or are they just going to pick one version and show it as, all right, this is what happened? Could George R.R. Martin just tell them which version is the true one? Does Martin even know? Sometimes Martin left intentional mysteries even he doesn't know. Or maybe Martin does know, but he feels that, no, I think that structurally it would be wrong to give the audience a definitive answer. I know, but I'm going to take it to my grave about, well, what really happened. Hard to say. And it might be different for different things. There's some points where Martin might know, others he might not. But just how are you going to handle, like, Rhaenyra breaking up with Criston Cole? Is it going to be something they describe to other people? So from asking other fans, this is the top question. It'll come up in season 1. It'll be throughout the show. How will it address the unreliable narrator format of the source material? Almost everyone, this is the number one top question. The few people who've made longer lists like me, it's always at least the first or second question. It's very much the top one. It is hard to get away from this, of just how will you approach, in general, unreliable narrator format. So you see, this is a question the showrunners could plausibly address. It's not a spoiler, it's just what is the style you are approaching this with. Moving on, question 2. How will they handle time skips in the Rogue Prince era, which lasts 30 years? This is season 1. The reign of Rhaenyra's father leading up to the actual Civil War. We know it's not starting with the Civil War, it's starting with the reign of her father to show this is how the two factions in the war developed to the point they wanted to kill each other. And that makes complete sense. That's how I would do it. Martin even considers the Rogue Prince to be the start of the Dance of the Dragons era, broadly speaking. But it covers 30 years. How are they going to handle time skips? Well, I wrote this back in May, but we're starting to see some answer to that. We're starting to see some of this take shape in that they've outright cast a young Rhaenyra and young Alicent, Millie Alcock and Emily Carey. However, there were also casting sheet leaks which seemed to imply that even Emma Darcy and Olivia Cooke might not be playing Rhaenyra and Alicent during the Civil War itself. If that happens by season 2 or even season 3, we might see 3 distinct actresses playing them across 3 time periods. Like they've got younger teenaged Rhaenyra, and Darcy is playing early 20s Rhaenyra around the year 120 AC, year of the Red Spring, Laena's funeral. There's 10 more years between that and the actual outbreak of the Civil War. What if they recast yet again with a slightly older actress? So there's teenage Rhaenyra, 20-something Rhaenyra, and then 30-something Rhaenyra for the actual war. Basically what Matt Smith's The Crown show did, where we switch actors every couple of seasons. Officially, I don't know if they will do that. Will you recast for the actual Civil War? But for the one we do know about, that at the very least, we're going to see teenaged versions of Rhaenyra and Alicent, which are important enough that they felt that the need to announce it. Like, they didn't really draw that much attention to young Cersei or young Ned Stark when they were announced compared to this. They didn't announce them individually. So, related to that, how are you handling time skips, is specifically Millie Alcock and Emily Carey. Are you going to do that by having flashbacks to earlier time periods intercut throughout season 1? Some people jumped to that conclusion. I didn't, because I thought it was idiotic. No, I think it's a really bad idea. I've seen other channels saying the same thing. Why are you saying flashbacks? You don't know if it's flashbacks that are intercut. That the other option, because that's so confusing, the other option is just, why not just tell the story in chronological order? Like The Crown, or like Natalie Dormer's The Tudors show, where just, years pass between episodes. That best case scenario, what I'm hoping they do, and I've seen other channels say this, is we hope the teenaged versions play these characters for like the first 3 or 4 episodes out of 10 in season 1. And then by like episode 4, there's an internal time skip, and that's when Darcy and Cook take over the roles. That's what they should be doing. I mean, you could have flashbacks after that, just it's fun to see the younger version again or some other little revelation, but not leaning on it like the way Lost would have flashbacks were a big part of their structure. Like even in like season 2 or even season 3, I would like to see a cameo of Millie Alcock and Emily Carey just because they're part of the family by this point. And I hate it when they go, oh no, it was just a cameo. This wasn't a cameo. You were focusing on Ed Sheeran for 5 minutes, that if they had a literally 2-minute cameo by teenage Rhaenyra in season 3 just to see Millie Alcock again, I'd be fine with that. That's what a cameo means. It's fun. It's just nice to see the actor again. Not as a core structural element, though, where every couple episodes will flash back between the 2 eras intercutting. That is needlessly confusing. You don't need to do that. Just do what The Crown did and the Tudors did, show it in chronological order. But that is a big question, which we will see before too long, of how are you handling the different eras, that there's different Rhaenyras and Alicents at different ages. It's an obvious question that comes up. Well, another obvious question, sort of a tangent from this, which I didn't officially list as the top 10, because it's not something I expect them to reasonably answer, is how many seasons is this show planned to run? In ideal circumstances. I didn't want to waste one of the top 10 slots on it because, that's not something they'd be comfortable answering, probably. That you want to run for a lot of seasons, just how much have you planned this out? And the answer I'm looking for is something like at least 5 seasons, but if season 1 is a hit, we'd prefer to tell it in 7 rather than throwing material out. Because remember back in Game of Thrones when we were worried about they're going to outpace the books, and Martin said, why are you racing through material? And even all the book sites where you condense the 4th and 5th book into season 5 and threw out a ton of material, then complained that they ran out of book material. That you saw, that didn't need to be, we always said 8 seasons. It's everyone from Martin to HBO said this should have been like 10 seasons. We would have given them 10 seasons, HBO said. They were rushing to get done. No, if anything, most people who are running a successful fantasy show or a successful drama want more seasons, not less, so they can still have a job. So they can keep all this franchise going. Benioff and Weiss are only interested in themselves because they wanted to run off to do Star Wars movies. Normal people want more seasons to tell a story, not less, because if you condense it, you'll throw stuff out like what Game of Thrones did, where it was badly rushed. We don't want, I don't want a long show. I want a long show. to tell the story right as opposed to rushing through it and cutting things out. So I can understand if they said, well, between 5 to 7, depending on how successful it is and how well HBO thinks we're doing, I'm fine with that. But I'd like a tentative answer in that just for them to say at least 5, depends on how we're doing, as opposed to some people were wondering if this show would only last like 4 seasons because the war only lasts 2 years. And I keep trying to tell them, like, based on the internal breaks, I can see the actual war being 4 seasons, each season covering like half a year. Because they go, oh, it's only 2 seasons, it's only 2 years, the war only lasts 2 years. Breaking Bad in universe only took place within a 2-year time span, but it covered 5 seasons, because 1 season doesn't equal 1 year. But they're doing all that. On top of this, either way, if you actually read Fire and Blood, the Dance of the Dragons event has a direct sequel, the Regency era, that followed it, when all the surviving teenage characters from the dance grow up and have various other conflicts and political intrigues. So a question is, are you doing like 7 seasons on just the Dance of the Dragons, or are you including the Regency when you talk about this is how long the show is going to run? Like, that's a big question. I don't know. Is House of the Dragon just about the Dance of the Dragons, or will it just keep continuing? I think just for marketing purposes, you should rebrand it when you get to the Regency and call it something else to hook in new viewers, but have like all the same cast members and stuff. It should be a direct sequel show. People are more likely to watch season 1 of a Regency show than to dive into season 8 of a Dance of the Dragons show, which isn't really about that anymore. So I'd like to ask them, give us a rough figure of how long you think you're going to run. And if they say, well, 5 to 7 years, we hope. Next one is, what is your end date? Are you going to lead this show through the end of the war and through the Regency? Or would you, Ryan Condal, after wrapping up the Civil War, leave the show and a new showrunner would come on to take over for the Regency era and it's functionally a sequel show? So you see, it's a complicated. I don't think they'd answer that, and it is putting them on the spot to pressure. How many seasons are you planning your show to run? Will it go through the Regency? Even if it doesn't, that'll be a sequel to this if there's still demand for it at the time. But instead of putting it as a headline question, because I don't think they'd ask that, and it would be years away from now anyway, I think the more pressing question right now is, within season 1 itself, how are you going to handle time skips across a scale of 30 years is a bit more important for a season-by-season breakdown. So question 2 here is my catch-all for the how many seasons / how much time is it going to cover. Well, season 1 time skips, how are you going to do that, particularly with the teenage characters? Is it going to be flashbacks? I hope not. I hope they just have 4 episodes with the teenagers first and then just go, chronologically. Makes sense. It's just pragmatic that way. Common sense. Question 3 out of 10. How will they handle diversity? Racial diversity, LGBT diversity, and to an extent, disability stuff. Because Game of Thrones got really criticized in its later seasons for marginalizing non-white characters, the LGBT characters, also women, though there's so many prominent female characters in this show that it's probably going to cover that. Because Dorne isn't in it, The Dance of the Dragons is really the least racially diverse prequel out of all possible ideas. I mean, just on paper, we knew that would be an issue. And the way they seem to be trying to make up for this is by making the Velaryons mixed race. Because they're not from Westeros, they're from Essos, they're from the old Valyrian Empire, and they're not dragon lords. The books do say that the lower-ranking Valyrian nobles below the Dragon Lords really weren't as strict about blood purity. So that has at least some basis in the books. I mean, they're rounding out some of the world building. It is a change. They're saying, well, the minor nobles could be racially diverse, so let's swap this one to be that way. I don't really see it as breaking the internal rules of the Storyverse any more than when they made the pirate captain Salvador Sant black in season 2, because they said, well, he's from the other continent, it's more racially diverse there, he could have been black, so okay, well, as long as it doesn't break the internal rules. Some people are going, well, the internal rules about Valyrian blood purity, they said the lower ranking ones weren't strict about that. I don't really have too much of a problem with that. I'm more worried about how this show's writers explain that question in their own words. You see, I put this pretty high, question number 3, because it's one of the few things we know already, and a lot of people are talking about, is just in terms of questions we would ask. Hey, you made the Velaryons black. Can you explain that choice in your own words? And I'll judge whether they give as good of an answer as I could, or if this is a case of me coming up with a better explanation than they did. That'll be an issue if they go whatever. I'll be annoyed at them, because there even is a decent explanation you could give in universe. It's more about their reaction to the question. And I think this is on the top of a lot of people's minds behind, like Unreliable Narrator and how many seasons and time skips is, wow, that seems like sort of a change. Could you explain that? I feel there are plausible, presentable explanations. But we're coming off of 10 years of Benioff and Weiss, these flippant, rude frat boys, ignoring our questions or literally saying, creatively it made sense to us because we wanted it to happen. I think it's on t-shirts now. That's a major quote, that the week after the Sansa rape episode, they bizarrely said it about the Tyrion storyline, and no one was asking about, Tyrion doesn't meet Dany at the end of book 5. He's about to meet her. And he said, oh, we sped that up a little bit, but I know that's created controversy, but I hope no one minds, because creatively it made sense to us because we wanted it to happen. Which wouldn't even be a justification for what you're doing with Tyrion, but no one was upset about that. This is literally a week after the Sansa rape, and I can't tell, is he really that oblivious, or was that like a backhanded screw you? That was him thumbing his nose at anyone who said you changed the Sansa rape stuff. A little thing like, I know as if a week after the Sansa rape, he said, I know that Marjorie is said in the books to part her hair on the other side, and I know that's a controversy, but creatively it made sense to us because we wanted it to happen. Like, no one, that isn't a controversy, and you're belittling our complaints about, dear God, you threw out Sansa's storyline with waving aside this false comparison to something no one was talking about. And that is the level of discourse. We actually saw that in season 1. Like, when they changed Talissa from Jane Westerling, and they go, oh, well, it's just what's in the books off screen. It isn't. He's lying. Or I remember someone actually managed to ask him at the Comic-Con for season 4, after season 4, why did you cut out the Tysha reveal for the real reason Tyrion kills his father? And he goes, oh, well, we just ran out of time. And there was another reason behind that. You make time for that they give us the runaround. It culminated in creatively, it made sense to us. And the news media never called them on that. That is a ridiculous statement. Imagine if Joss Whedon was saying that today about the Justice League stuff, and when opinion is finally turned on him. And I think media historians a decade from now will look back in disgust at how much the hype media just let Benioff get away with this. Much as today I look back at 2017 and go, I can't believe people at the time were in the news letting Whedon off the hook for this, because you do not criticize Joss Whedon. He's on a pedestal. So instead of, how dare you question us for race swapping these characters, I'm not yelling at you about this. And I don't want their reaction to be, how dare you even question us for race swapping them? That is a bad answer on their side. I want to maturely and respectfully ask them, I'd ask this to their face, fine, okay, not in an accusatory way. Obviously, you have race swapped the Velaryons. A lot of people are talking about this. Can you please explain or elaborate on the thinking and discussions that went into that in your own words? I'm eager to learn in your own words why you made this decision and the justifications for it, and I might even agree with you. And if they give a respectful answer, I'll be happy. A thought out one. As opposed to because I felt like it. It's not the question so much as we're judging their answer based on whether it's respectful or not, like that. But it's an obvious question. I don't mean, how dare you just, please explain that in your own words. I'm not speaking for you. So that's the big one right now. LGBT diversity is just similar to that it's not so much a question as a confirmation. I mean, we know there are LGBT characters in this prequel era. It's just, in Game of Thrones, Loras Tyrell was so marginalized, and they kept saying, he'll do more later, he'll do more later. In the books, he does this big thing where he leads the forces storming Dragonstone to reclaim it from Stannis' skeleton garrison, and everyone who sees it in the books, they say it's the most heroic thing we ever did. He was riddled with arrows, he kept fighting, he carved a path through that castle, and then he nearly got killed with boiling oil, and he's really badly hurt. And it's this awesome off-screen battle, and they kept going, wait for it, Loras is going to do stuff, and then he didn't. That season 2 onwards, Loras didn't really do anything. I mean, not, well, 2 he was with Reina, he's inclusive, but season 3 onwards, what is Loras doing? Season 5, he exists to what? Be a tortured gay guy? I don't... They really had no idea what to do, because they cut out most of the Tyrell story. This isn't the book story. They marginalized him. And I'm not even going to dignify that they said, oh no, our TV Ilaria is, well, she is bi in the books, but that's Benioff sexually fetishizing brown women, as he so often does, when he'd have like her just being everything Dorne related. That is not diversity, that is an insult. Racially, LGBT, and people were really offended by that, and news wouldn't report on why is this like this. They'd go, Dorne sure is pretty stupid, but Benioff and Weiss are great. They're the ones that ruined this relative to the source material, and you're giving them a free pass. So I'm just thinking about how they cut out characters like that and really, really messed it up. That in this prequel era, we have season 1, we have Laenor Velaryon, probably his sister Lena. There's a few lines in the book that heavily imply that she was gay. She'd be in there too. Curious how they'll present that. But both of them would die in season 1. So rather than, oh, well, we have gay characters, both of them die in season 1. The big question here is just, how prominently are you going to use Jane Arryn? Rhaenyra's first cousin who inherited rule of House Arryn in her own right. She's a major faction leader, and she is in a long-term homosexual relationship with another woman, Jess Redford. And minor spoilers, they don't get poisoned or killed in the war. Nothing bad happens to them. They're just this loving couple, and they don't get, like, tortured to death by their enemies or anything. Or, you know, the whole thing of, what's the trope? Bury your gays. Oh, we have gay characters, but we kill them off after one season that you're not allowed to be happy. And just, no, Jane is pretty normal, and nothing bad happens to her like that. So, given that the 2 prominent gay characters in season 1 die as part of the plot, pressure them. Are you going to marginalize Jane Arryn the way Loras was marginalized? Because she's an important enough character and survives, that she would survive through every season of this show. How prominently are you going to use Jane Arryn? It is basically what the LGBT diversity thing boils down to. And it's not like, oh, invent a gay character. There is a gay character in the books. I'm asking, are you going to take the time? Like Loras was a book character they marginalized. This character is in the source material. I'm not asking you to invent something. I'm asking you to not cut out stuff and then have people complain this show isn't diverse when it could have been, and you just didn't bother. I'm actually not that worried about that, because one of the new core writing staff, Sarah Hess, is a Korean-American woman, used to be a writer on Orange is the New Black. She is herself a gay woman and married to another woman. So we have a gay female writer on the staff. I don't think they'd marginalize gay characters that much. I mean, they could, but there's a voice in the writer's room. So I'm not as worried about that. This is a question I would ask, or, leading questions in a Q&A, because I know it's a song and dance to get them to talk about stuff of, wow, the Velaryon changes. Can you explain that in your own words, please, instead of just stonewalling us and pretending like there wasn't a change? I might even agree with your description. Please tell us, what did you think behind this? And wow, are you going to make sure to use Jane Arryn prominently? She's kind of the only gay character that lives through multiple seasons, compared to, like, marginalizing Loras. It's not quite, it's confirming that, are you keeping that thing in from the books? While I'm on the topic of diversity, I'm going to make a whole separate video about this later. Disability. Because, you know, think about it, Game of Thrones actually won a couple of awards for having people with disabilities in prominent roles. Not that we should praise Benioff and Weiss for doing this. It wasn't their idea. It's based on Martin's books. Why should we praise them for following what a book did? You know, it's not like they're the ones that came up with this, but, you know, they did, the show in general deserved these awards. I mean, season 1. Because if you think about it, when was the last time that you saw an actor with dwarfism headlining a major drama series the way that Peter Dinklage did? Bran Stark is paralyzed from the waist down in the first episode. Jaime Lannister gets his hand cut off in season 3, and neither of them gets magically healed eventually. This is a realistic fantasy world. When you get a crippling injury, you stay crippled. That Bran and Jaime stay that badly injured with realistic disabilities for the rest of the show. So they received a couple of awards for that, particularly for Dinklage, rightly so, but also for the other characters. You know, obviously Isaac Hempstead Wright isn't disabled in real life. You know, Dinklage really has dwarfism. That is a thing he has. So they received awards for that. I don't want to give full spoilers in this video. That's why I'm hemming and hawing over it. Basically, there are a couple of characters in the Dance of the Dragons story who either have congenital conditions or who get maimed during the course of the story like Jaime and Bran did. So think like Game of Thrones Season 1, I don't want to tell you spoilers, Jaime gets his hand cut off. There are characters who get maimed during the course of this. And there's a question about whether they'll do that respectfully. There's a couple of characters who are mentally disabled, and there's a question of will they present that respectfully. But that's getting ahead of ourselves because these characters haven't even been cast yet or injured yet. I don't want to get into that too much, but this will come up over time of how will you keep in these characters with these issues or not, and will you cast people with these disabilities like that? But spoilers. Right now, I want to focus on the race and LGBT stuff, just because it's obvious. It would be silly not to ask them about the Velaryons as one of our top questions. And while we're at it, hey, you're not going to marginalize Jane Eyre, are you? Because we're annoyed that Loras was marginalized in Game of Thrones. So that's the first 3 questions. Unreliable narrator, time skips and seasons, diversity. Question 4. Which characters will be cut for time? Or, sub-branch of that question, which characters might have their names changed for being too similar? Which storylines and characters can we reasonably expect them to cut for time? Emphasis on reasonably. Because if you cut the Daemon the Daring storyline, he's like the POV character for the entire Reach arc of the war. The entire the campaign, there's like a civil war within the Reach, because instead of the Great House siding with one or the other, the southern half of the Reach sides with Aegon II, but the northern half and the Tarleys side with Rhaenyra. So they have to slowly fight their way from Old Town to King's Landing. It takes over a year as they fight their way literally across Westeros from one coast to the other. And Daemon the Daring is the viewpoint character for that. That if you cut him, you cut that whole arc. If you cut the Riverlands arc, that's the story that has Starks and Lannisters in it. So they might cut some characters and by extension cut entire subplots with them, entire theaters of the war. And there is an argument for doing that. There's only so much time in a TV show. Benioff and Weiss abused that, of course, because they were shortening the physical number of seasons that they needed to do it because they were running off. But, you know, there's certain things like Lord of the Rings movies. I recognize there were certain subplots from the Lord of the Rings movies they had to cut out for time. That it would be weird you couldn't put that much in. They were already too long for pacing. The issue isn't so much whether they're cutting them as that we would appreciate if they tell us from the start. Unlike what Game of Thrones did, where we had no idea until season 5 came and they went, oh, we're cutting Arianne Martell. They actually never announced they were cutting Arianne Martell. they were utter cowards about it, that they were afraid of backlash when they'd cut a character, so they just wouldn't announce them. And there was actually this limbo state of they sort of didn't want to admit they cut the other Tyrell brothers in like season 2 or 3. And part of it was they did sort of want to work them in later, but if you're not going to have Arianne Martell in season 5, she's never going to be in. By that point, it wasn't, well, we're holding out. Like season 1, you could get away with not saying they're other Tyrell brothers because you hope to introduce them in season 2. This is different. This is, you're cutting the Arianne. You're cutting out young Griff. Or Jane Poole. By cutting Jane Poole, they led to the Sansa rape. Or cutting Lady Stoneheart or young Griff, all these other characters. And they wouldn't admit it because they were hiding from the backlash. If we don't draw attention to it, people won't know to be angry until it's already over. Versus, had they honestly told us up front, we're not going to do young Griff, I actually think that's insane now because it's so central to the later stories. I don't think that's just a minor side story anymore. But other things like Lord of the Rings, they told us when the first movie came out, Jackson said, I'm not putting the Scouring of the Shire in because the pacing would be ridiculous. And I agree, it's a bad situation. On the one hand, you need to put the Scouring of the Shire in, it's thematically important. But on the other hand, I agree with him that it would make the movie 30 to 40 minutes longer to give the Scouring of the Shire, and it works in the book in a way that it doesn't in a movie. Whether you agree with his decision or not, he said that when the first movie came out, this is the general structure of things I'm going to cut. And he was honest about it. And I respect that. Versus playing coy with it to avoid the backlash for as long as possible by not announcing it. You see what I'm saying here? It's just the cynical, childish, dodging responsibility. So, if they definitively know these are characters or subplots we're not going to feature for time, can you tell us that up front, honestly? And I know some of this is, we think we're going to cut them, but if season 1 is a hit, HBO will give us 7 seasons instead of 5, and we'll expand the story. I'm okay with that. Just verbatim tell us that. Tell us, this character is on the fence, but we hope to get him in if we get another season renewal. Benioff and Weiss, the whole dance they gave with that, they were lying. It was never about, oh, well, we might fit them in later if we get more. You're getting infinite renewal. By season 5, at least, they knew Arianne Martell wasn't in this, and they gave no real answer for it. But this is stuff that would come up in season 1, so it's not even season 2. Things like Nettles. We don't even know if Nettles is in this show. She'll probably be in this show. But I mean, season 1 things that we're really worried about are Rhaenyra's children and Alicent's children. This is stuff we would know for season 1. We're not sure if Rhaenyra's youngest son of her first 3, Joff, might not be in it because he doesn't do that much. And, I could see him being omitted, and it's still basically being pretty much the same show. To a lesser extent, I wouldn't cut Daemon the Daring, Alicent's youngest son, because it leaves out the whole Reach theater of the war. But I could see them cutting that for time, because then there's the argument, well, it takes up so much time from the other storylines, we don't want to show it. I can see that. I don't think they should. If they're going to cut Daemon the Daring, they should tell us in advance. Like, it's not that they're doing it, it's the way they're addressing it. If politely, in one of the first interviews, Ryan Condal says, we're not going to do Daemon the Daring, and he brings it up or is upfront about it, versus waiting for us to find out when season 1 airs, and never, that's what Benioff and Weiss would do. That when episode 10 airs, we go, wow, I guess Arianne isn't in this. So I want them to confirm or deny, are you planning on including Daemon the Daring? Because they should know that by this point. Not like season 2 characters, I know that's in flux. But reasonably, within reason, characters that in the book would have appeared in this time frame, who are you going to leave in or not? A related issue, less controversial, is if certain characters will be renamed, because it's felt that in live action they're too similar to other characters' names. Now, there is reasonable argument for that. Game of Thrones made Robert Arryn into Robin Arryn, which is really a minor change because everyone calls him Sweet Robin. His nickname is Sweet Robin Arryn, but his real name is actually Robert, and it's just everyone calls him Sweet Robin. TV show, his name is literally Robin, spelled with a Y. Okay, I felt that was a minor change, even though the whole point is there's more than one guy named Robert across an entire continent, and he was even named after Robert Baratheon. That made sense, versus they renamed Asha Greyjoy Yara Greyjoy in Season 2, because they didn't bother to think out in Season 1, more than one season in advance, that Asha Greyjoy sounds like Osha the Wildling, even though Asha Greyjoy is by far a more important character. Had they planned this out from the beginning, we'd have Asha Greyjoy and Yara the Wildling, which makes much more, in terms of character importance. It's just the incompetence of that, more than if it was a deliberate change or not. If they had thought from the beginning, okay, we're going to rename it's the fact that this is a Season 2 character, you kind of forgot. You were not planning ahead, and it's the lack of foresight more than if it was an intentional change, which, I don't like this character rename. I can see that, versus you were an incompetent buffoon who weren't thinking ahead. For House of the Dragon, though, off the top of my head, we know Matt Smith is playing Daemon Targaryen. Maybe Daeron sounds too similar. You'll notice that I always call him Daeron the Daring, because Daeron is a common name in House Targaryen. I mean, Daeron the First, the young dragon, Daeron the Second, the good king, that there are a couple of characters named Daeron, so I always call him Daeron the Daring. There's 3 major characters with that name just to set them apart. That they could make an argument for, well, if it was a choice between not having Daeron the Daring in at all, or, well, we'll have him in, but we're going to give him a different name, I'd go with the renamed one, because it's cosmetic. It's not that big of a significance to his name. Compared to other characters where it's a plot point, I know he's named after other people, but if they felt in live action this is confusing, fair enough. That at this moment in time, I'm so worried they're going to cut him entirely that I'd welcome him even if he's got a different name. On top of this, multiple characters are named Aegon because it's a traditional family name, that Rhaenyra's youngest son is named Aegon III, but I call him Aegon III because he eventually becomes king, but they don't call him that in universe at the time. Even in Fire and Blood, it says, from this point on, to avoid confusion, we'll call Aegon II Aegon the Elder, and Rhaenyra's youngest son Aegon the Younger. It's not too big of a problem because he's like 5. He's a very young child at the time. It doesn't really affect the story that much. You can tell he's not. He rides a dragon Stormcloud, but it's not big enough to take to war. That it's not too hard to confuse it too. You can in-universe point out it says Alicent was annoyed that Rhaenyra named her son Aegon, and took it as an insult, which it probably was. So on that sense, I think they might keep the name Aegon, it's traditional family name, important character, because Aegon the Third, we need to have them. How could the other one be the 4th and 5th if you don't want the name? I'm not as worried about Aegons, but how will you address that? Have a nickname? Daeron the Daring is the big one I'm worried about. Other things, one thing I have noticed they're definitively doing is that Corlys's wife, whose name is actually Rhaenys Targaryen, in the official cast descriptions, they consistently refer to her as Rhaenys Velaryon, using her married surname to distinguish her, I guess, from the original Rhaenys Targaryen, who was the sister wife of Aegon the Conqueror. Most people think, when they think Rhaenys, they think, one of the first 3 Targaryens to conquer Westeros. There's actually 3 major characters named Rhaenys, and the other one was Jon Snow's older half-sister, by Elia Martell, got killed in the sack of King's Landing, also named Rhaenys. But the big ones in this prequel era, because that hasn't happened yet, are Rhaenys, the sister wife of Aegon the Conqueror, and Rhaenys Velaryon. Names repeat in dynasties, and people are named after each other. Rhaenys is named after the first Rhaenys, specifically. This is a show that will have Rhaenyra and her father's first cousin Rhaenys. We know this. They've confirmed this with casting descriptions. And on top of that, one of Daemon's daughters in the show, in the books, which we think is in the show, we got Rhaenyra, Rhaenys, and Daemon's daughter, Reina. Could they rename Reina because they feel it's too similar? It's got a different ending. I don't know. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, like, I could see an argument for renaming Daemon the Daring. I'd just be happy he's in there. But don't just, it's more that I'm worried, I don't want them to stumble into, let's call Asha Greyjoy Yara because we didn't think this through, you know? But in terms of the one character we do know is going to be changed, Rhaenys Velaryon, we'll refer to her by her married surname more. Well, fine, that's elegant in its simplicity. There's three Rhaenyses, it's hard to distinguish all of them. This will be Rhaenys Velaryon. I'm fine with that.